Welcome to this fourth in our series on Beyond Returning. So this whole series has been about considering the purpose of spirituality and awakening, not as going back to the source from which we arose, but to be able to become capable of participating in the never-ending, the Sufis say, new creation that's born again at every instant, and to express what's possible from each of us being a unique manifestation of divinity. So I thought I would start with a little quote from the Gospel. So if Jonathan doesn't mind me doing this. So this is Matthew 5:14 through 16. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. And now a little segue into an idea from the Kabbalah, which is the Jewish mystical work. And there's something in there known as the bread of shame. And the bread of shame means becoming capable of participating in this process of transforming the light that makes up our being, our unique expression of divinity. And then there's something that returns from that light that goes back to what we think of as the divine, not only the divine transcendent, but the divine in all of manifestation. So it's a gift to all of existence to participate in that circulation of light. So it says in the Kabbalah that the human who has learned to be capable of engaging in this process, but instead just keeps the light to themselves, is partaking of the bread of shame. And then a commentary that someone wrote about this, without removing the bread of shame, we cannot hold any enlightenment, fulfillment, sense of achievement, or satisfaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's this very clear sense in the Jewish Christian narrative, and I talk that way typically, is that the narrative that we inherit in Christianity is a narrative that includes what we call the Old Testament and the New Testament. So that narrative all the way through, that narrative thread, always is about not only the circumstances of the people of Israel with the people of God, but then the intent or purpose of them. That there is this intent about how to live that is always woven into this conversation, so that you can become a light unto the nations, and you can be a light to all peoples. Is an image that is gathered all the way through the Hebrew Scriptures. Of course, from the Beatitudes, you're the light of the world. You are called to be a light in the world. And then the story of Christ saying to people, saying to his followers, but then to all people, go out into the world. The version that many of us are baptizing, but also don't forget that there's other commissionings that he did as well, where the commissioning is to heal, to cast out demons, which is another language for restoring health and vitality and wholeness. That is always intended to not be something that we hold on to, but something that is always outward. Here's the weird thing. We often get the outward, we often think of this, and we've said this before in this room, we often think of this as something that we have to do after we get our lives figured out. That's one of the hard things, is that we often think, I'm not going to share light until I'm sure that I have light. So I'm going to make sure I have enough light before I share light. Mm-hmm. And it's a great idea. It's a wonderful idea. It's just not at all the way Jesus or the Hebrew Scriptures talked about it. That part of the way that we live is more quantum, which is to not think of it in terms of Newtonian linearity, but to think of it as all over at once. Because all at once, it's always always in the midst of, I'm always in the midst of sharing light, and I'm always in the midst of kindling the light inside my heart. I'm always in the midst of loving my neighbor as I'm in the midst of loving myself. If I wait until I love myself before I love my neighbor, guess what's going to happen?
A whole lot of nothing.
That's a whole lot of nothing. I'm never going to leave the house. Right? And that's the consistent narrative of the ancient mystics, is that we are always caught up in shining light and tending light, not one then the other, or one or the other, but always all together all at once. I think that's the idea of timelessness and the enfolding of time that I think quantum theory, quantum discovery has helped us understand, is that we want to think that this happens now and this happens now and this happens now, and it's more entangled than that. It's more timeless than that. It's more, I love Dr. Who's way of saying it's more timey-wimey than that. It's all kind of flowing in and around.
And related to this, again, we think about the Buddha under the Bodhi tree and the Buddha's
Yes.
enlightenment, and the Buddha having a recollection of thousands of past lives, insects and other realms and whatever, thinking about, okay, all this culminated in the Buddha's enlightenment, but in actuality, every single experience of the Buddha throughout all of those lifetimes is an integral part of that enlightenment, and the enlightenment could not have taken place without that. But the same is true for us. There's no wasted experience. Every experience we have in this life contributes to our awakening, but also contributes to the awakening of existence. So yesterday, a friend of mine who's a Sufi that lives in California sent me a question wanting to know the source of something the Sufis talk about, the purpose of creation. God was a hidden treasure. He wanted to know where that passage came from. So I researched it, and it's not in the Quran, but it's in the Hadith, which is kind of like the commentaries. But in this analysis of it, an Islamic scholar said that what happened was the Prophet David asked God, what's the reason for existence? And God's response was, I was a hidden treasure desiring to know and be known, to love and to be loved. And as we've talked about throughout the series, that could only take place by what culminates in the experiences of every single thing in existence with the light that returns. So now let me turn to my favorite quote from Pir Vilayat, who was my teacher in our Sufi order for 25 years. He would say, dare you have the courage to be who you really are. And he would talk about claiming our divine inheritance. Well, we think about that like, we've got this inheritance and we just have to recognize that it's there, and now we're all set. We can just do with it what we want. But we have to become capable of using it, and furthermore, that inheritance is not something meant to just be passed out the way that it is. It's seeds of possibilities of our awakening in life, contributing to the awakening of everything in existence. It's the unique way of our relationship through all the divine qualities, and each of us is kind of a amalgam of tendencies towards what's more natural for some qualities in us than others. Some people are naturally much more compassionate. Some people are much more what the yogis call jnanis, seeking wisdom and so on, beauty. So we all have our kind of unique mixture of that, but it's our way of what we do with that. And that's, again, related to this idea of the bread of shame. Instead of, oh, look what I've got here, I'm going to just be like Scrooge McDuck in the vault, throwing the money up and, bringing it out into the world, being like a horn of plenty. So, talking about beyond returning, the reason why we're here, a big part of that is making a commitment to engage in whatever works for us that enables us to become more and more awakened to the reality of who we are. We are human divine beings. We exist on what I've lately called many vibrational levels of existence simultaneously, and our consciousness tends to be focalized and oftentimes constricted in what we refer to as the simulation of just a very narrow perspective of what we think reality is. So when we become capable of awakening to this broader reality, now many more possibilities can come through us, and not only that, the quality of the light that we're able to make use of receiving is greatly enhanced, as is the quality of the light that we're able to put out into existence. So we have much, much more to bring to the table.
Paul says it this way. Paul in the New Testament. He says similar stuff. Body of Christ. And I've started using your language, the vibrational levels, because really all we're talking about is energy. And we've done this in other classes, by the way. But really all we're talking about, everything here, everything is energy in various different coalescences, right? Coalesced energy in various different ways. That's mind-blowing. So then what we're talking about is then how does energy vibrate in my life and your life? And is energy limited to this space, or is it possible for energy to move in different spaces? And by the way, that's basic quantum physics, is how does energy move, and it moves in different planes and all that kind of stuff. So when Paul says the body of Christ, when other people say that we are living in the midst of an experience of the divine, that we're both having that's transcendent and present, and it's all mixed up and all together, that's the ancient intuition reflecting what we are now by science are discovering. Maybe not discovering, but uncovering. So when Paul says there's this life that is other, that is vibrating within us, that somehow transcends and is also radically present with us, that somehow unites us all together and makes us, one, able to do more than we can individually, what he's describing is quantum physics at a different level. But he's describing the experience that he's having of what it means to live in the midst of this. Powerful energy that not only allows us to be in ourselves fully, but also ties us to one another and to everything intimately and infinitely. So that when we go walking, this is why I walk so much and why I watch birds. This is the long, slow effect of that, is that I've slowly recognized that I'm not watching birds. I am with creation. Okay? So that when you are digging in your soil, you're digging in the very stuff of your garden of which you are made, and you share the very essence that you are digging in the midst of. So your energy and that energy are all tied up for one another. Here's where that I think what we're talking about is then, so what? Well, then maybe the so what is, I'll regard that soil with a more friendly eye than with a disposing eye. I'll regard that bird as companion on the journey, not as foreign thing that is mine to consume. I'll recognize that we might have more in union with one another and with all creation, so then my heart will be softened, and I will direct my light toward where that light is, that all light might fully vibrate, fully reveal the beauty that is possible. That's the transformation that is slowly unfolding. And by the way, if this feels like a very complicated way to live your life, if this feels like a complicated way to kind of walk through the days with your awareness all tuned and you're always around friends, yeah. And I would say it's not complicated. It's actually radically simple, but it is infinitely complex. And the ancient mystics were never afraid of complexity. They found great simplicity and complexity could live in the same space. So Francis composes this hymn, St. Francis, that is this hymn to the moon, brother moon, sister sun, all of these creation, that Francis is now living in this vast complexity of life. And he's so immersed in all of this complexity that he recognizes that the boundaries between his life and all of life are no longer meaningful boundaries. It's life. It's life. So fully that he's completely emptied himself, and then he finds himself emptying himself. The tradition says that he had the stigmata, but the stigmata is the symbol of an emptied life, a life that has surrendered itself to all of life. That's what that's a symbol of. Not as some weird self-punishment, bloody sacrifice thing. It's this union of all creation. I am fully present with all. Whew.
Well, and as I've said before, Hazrat Khan said the purpose of spirituality is to become a natural human being.
I love that
and
saying.
Being a natural human being is not complicated, because it's just natural. Like a child doesn't have to figure out, well, how can I just be in wonder all the time with everything that I experience? the natural condition of the child. Well, the child has to develop and all the stages we go through, but we've gotten so unnatural in our lives that it takes a lot of time and effort and hard work and practices and to be able to return to what is natural. And we're not returning to the way that we used to be. We're returning to a natural state that embodies all the wisdom that has been accrued through all the experiences of our lives.
Because part of nature is evolution.
Yes.
That's important. That disconnects us from nostalgic return. That nature is always trending toward complexity. Nature always moves toward complexity. Evolution moves towards simple systems evolve into more complex systems.
Yeah, and let's look at the notion of the transcendent. Oftentimes the purpose of both religion and spirituality has been to go to the transcendent.
You don't want to cover up your microphone.
To go to the transcendent. Yes. So I was thinking, imagine a chord or people singing together. A lot of times when people are singing, you can hear overtones. But imagine if you filtered out everything but the overtones. Well, that's nice, but that's not the same thing as the richness of all those vibrational states. So we don't want to filter out everything but what is transcendent to our usual experience in manifestation. We want to come to live in a world where it's all there. It's no place but here. But the here is so much more than what we were living in before. As we talked about, we live in this simulation, and we come to live in a much, much richer state of being. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine that I've known since college. Once a month we have these wonderful Zoom calls and talk about all kinds of spiritual things. And I was talking about, he was just trying to describe what it's like when he gets into the state that he's aiming for. And what I said is, I believe that once we get into, are able to be in this natural state of being, it doesn't seem other. It just is natural. We don't think, wow, what a wonderful state that I'm in, because it's the way we are. Kids don't go around thinking, wow, this is so cool. Look how, they're just being and becoming. So in Buddhism, someone asked the master, well, what is enlightenment? And they say, well, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. During enlightenment, the wood's not wood, the water's not water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. But what's happening after that awakened state, which is not an end point, it's an ongoing state of further evolution. What's happening is going through all the dimensions, it's reaching into all the realms, it's having its impact on all beings. So another gospel passage, John 3:16, verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me, the works that I do shall he do also, and greater works than these shall he do, because I go unto my Father. So what Jesus is saying, that each of us has got something that we can bring forth that Jesus couldn't bring forth. Each of us has got something that we can bring into existence that Buddha couldn't, that the Prophet Muhammad couldn't, that any of these great beings couldn't, because each of us is a unique, not duplicated in all of the universe, expression of divinity awakening to further possibilities of itself in existence. So think about that when you get up in the morning and go, well, what difference do I make? What can I contribute to things? Well, imagine that you have something that's just priceless beyond measure to contribute, and it's your dharma to do that. It's your spiritual duty, it's your purpose to come to a way of being in relationship with people, with nature, with beings that are present in the world, with beings who have gone on, with the great masters, saints and prophets, a way of being in that relationship which contributes to and furthers this never-ending process. Like Jonathan was saying, it's the nature of reality to always organize to a higher state of being. The divine being is always seeking to organize to a higher state of its own being, and its own being. The body of God is manifestation, not just physical, angelic realms. All the realms, that is the body of God. That's the means, just like our physical body is our means, Pierre Belliot would say, our spacesuit to experience the conditions of planet Earth. Manifestation is the divine's spacesuit to experience itself, him, herself.
Mm-hmm. And the path of that evolution we've talked about, and that continual process. And I always, if you hear me doing a similar refrain, it's because I'm really focused on helping a parish community. My work is a parish community and the people that kind of come in the web, the spider web of kind of All Saints, the area. And where I am constantly getting to is let's not try to think of this as one thing then the next thing. Let's not try to think this as a series of accumulations like we think of in our video game world of power-ups or of levels that we conquer and then go to that level. The continual refrain of Christ is the path to this kind of evolutionary life is very counterintuitive. It's surrender. We're going to hear it in the story that we read this morning upstairs, and we're going to talk about it. He calls it the cross, cruciformity, that we empty ourselves out. It's very counterintuitive. Like evolution, it's almost like Christ is saying, evolution is not something that you make happen. Evolution is something that you surrender yourselves to. And that sounds like a wonky head trip until, at least it sounds to me like that, until I find myself slowing myself down and listening to nature and recognizing that that's exactly what science is telling us. There's not a single creature that forces evolution to happen. There are creatures who surrender to their own life. And ultimately, by the way, the energy behind evolution is failure. You need to hear that. That's never good news. But the energy behind evolution is always failure, is always that one way of doing things has ceased to work. And in that failure and in the surrender to that failure, the creatures or the cell or the microsystem that's going on recognizes through a wonderful, complex series of events, mutations and other things like that, that this failure is pointing us to another way we have to live. And guess what happens to those of us who don't find that other way to live? Well, we cease to have the kind of life that we recognize now. I don't think, another conversation is what happens at death, and that's all energy as well. We can talk about that later. But then there's this wonderful opportunity in the midst of that failure to evolve. This is not something that we find ourselves into. There's no making yourself evolve. There's no walking the right number of labyrinths. There's no sitting in the right number of silences. There's no doing the right number of stretches until you get evolution. It's always surrender. It's always surrender, and it's always surrender wrapped up in some version of this is no longer working. What's the next that might work? And that's the path. I mean, I love to say that Christ is uniquely the one that said that. He's not. There are many he's and she's that said that very path from all traditions, that some version of surrender, of acceptance of the limits that we might find ourselves within, is the prompting to evolution. And let me say though, in the midst of that failure, in the midst of that surrender, that doesn't keep us from loving our neighbor. There are always practices that help us open ourselves. That's the light that needs to be shining, that we're always in the process of this outward and inward life, this outward and inward life that's all happening all at once.
So another way of looking at this, we've talked before about the Sufi idea of fana, which is usually translated as annihilation, but I think it's another way to think about that is it's recognizing when you reach the Sufis talk about stations in our life. They're called maqam, M-A-Q-A-M, and it's like we have lessons to learn and so on. And once we've really gone through all that, and it's time to move on to another state, you could say even like another quantum state of being, then it's releasing, being open to releasing the way that we understood things, the way that we went about doing things, so that we can go through this essential and necessary in-between process where it's unknown what's going to come through. It's the reformation that has to be in the mystery. And so in this sense, I'm thinking about tying this into failure. Failure would be trying to cling to the old ways after they no longer work.
Yeah.
Failure would be
clinging
like
to the return.
Failure would be like you've made all A's in the third grade, and you go, well, I've got this down. I'm going to keep doing the third grade. No, there's more things to learn. You need to go on to other things. So it's and I've talked about in other places what I call the gentle fana, because fana is usually a pretty heavy-duty wake-up call where we're shattered. It's often brought about by some trauma in our life, an illness, a loss of a loved one, loss of a job, divorce, just some bad thing where we don't have no choice but to let go of the way things were before. But the gentle fana is recognizing, okay, we've come to the culmination of this previous station in our life, and now it's time for Pure Light would talk about the next step. Well, we don't know where the next step is going to go, but we can have a confidence and a trust that releasing the previous way of being and understanding is going to allow us to be in a state which is going to enable us to take this next step for something to emerge that we couldn't possibly foresee from where we started. Because if we could foresee, it would just be a linear Newtonian continuation of a little bit more of the same, patching a little bit of this on and a little bit of that on. But think about the most significant events in your life, and they may have been wonderful, they may have been awful. But chances are, whatever they were, on the other side of that, something changed in you that hopefully you come to a state of integration with, and now you're not the same person that you were before, and you couldn't have been except for what you went through. So it's a different way of looking at our experiences in life, and not assuming, well, everything. Some of you may know I had a major heart attack when I was 52. I could easily have died from it. And up until then, I really felt like I had a charmed life. I mean, everything was just easy for me. And I thought, well, somehow I'm lucky. This is just, it's like, whoa, time to take stock of things. And then in 1990, our son David dies unexpectedly. It's like, the most traumatic thing you can imagine. But on the other side of that, so many blessings have come both to Diane and myself and to other people about the experiences that we've had. So it's like our outlook on our experiences in life makes a huge difference. Hazrat Khan has this beautiful idea. He talks about the smiling forehead. And it doesn't mean this Pollyanna or Candide, everything is the best of all possible worlds, everything is wonderful. But it's this inner sense of equanimity that can't be taken away regardless of what happens externally. And it doesn't mean we don't go through the feelings and the suffering and the anguish, but it means in the core of our being we recognize that something in us is always going to participate in this emergence of something further of the divine.
So here might be a good place to pause and see if there are any thoughts, questions. Where are we in time? Yeah, we're in a good place.
Good place.
So any thoughts or ruminations from the community where we are, or questions?
And please speak loudly if you do so. Yes.
Hey, good morning, guys. So, Jonathan, we were talking about connected with nature, everything's energy. Science is uncovering, something that kind of religion has spoken into in a bit more in-depthly. Is that understanding yourself come from a place of like astral experience, with those like realizations, or is a lot of it just, you seem to be a knowledgeable guy that reads a lot and is very studious in your career, and that's where I am. I live a lot in like amassing information so I guess I'm really just asking the difference between like knowledge and experience /wisdom.
It's always that wonderful. Thank you for the question. So I'll speak a little bit biographically, and there's a longer conversation that we might have that this kind of gives some tiptoes into. I grew up in a Christian home, raised in the Presbyterian church, worked at a summer camp and throughout high school, became a youth minister during college, and I've worked in the church ever since. So this work in the church is my life's work. I did a bunch of other jobs as well, because you can't pay bills, it turns out, working in the church when you're 20 years old. So yeah, I did a lot of stuff, and in the midst of that, there's the requisite twists and turns of teenage life and young adult life, which include searching and questioning and wondering, both at the big level, but also at the very particular level. A fragmented home, family systems that were predictable that became very unpredictable, and stability that was not stability, it was a false kind of stability, and all that being revealed and knowing that and intuiting and knowing that. So that was all rumbling around me as well. And all of that's to say, at a certain point in my life, I recognized that all of the mythic structure, let me not say it that way. All of the Jesus stuff that I've been baptized into and ordained into wasn't working. At an intuitive and at a intellectual and an emotional level. Okay? So if that's not working, then the question is, oh no, what's next? And so that's that's how I get to that. There is knowledge that you can read yourself into about this conversation, and that knowledge was there, but it didn't sink in mystically, and that might be a conversation we have. Well, let's just point it out. There's knowing, and then there's mystical knowing. Yeah. And that's one of the classic delineations, is that mysticism is lived experience in communion with the divine. That's one way to describe it. Okay. That the divine is not far away, that this wisdom that this knowledge that we're trying to get to is not out there or right here, it's in our bodies, it's enfleshed. We're having a lived experience with the mystery that we're trying to describe on the page or in the hymns. That this lived experience is the classic work of mystical consciousness. And I had a lot of robust book knowledge and a lot of kind of mystical intuition, as most of us do, and a lot of kind of cool experiences where I kind of went, wow, something's going on here. Yeah. But then when the book knowledge and all the stuff that I was trained to say and all the stuff that I'm supposed to say no longer works, then then something else is going to have to unfold. So this is the work of a couple of decades of doing that kind of work. Okay. I will say this though, there's a lot to read. And all of that reading can take you only so far. But that doesn't mean don't do the reading. Okay. Do the reading. Keep studying it. Read everything, for God's sakes. And know that your life, in the mystery of its fullness, you don't have to wait. You don't have to prompt. You don't have to encourage teaching to come to you that you will need. Life's experiences will lead you through the space that you need to encounter a kind of wisdom. And I have no other, this is the ancient recovery saying, I am just a thirsty person trying to show other thirsty people where I found drink. I know nothing else that is special. And none of us do, and Don doesn't either. We're just people who have had experiences that match that with wisdom. I mean, with teachings. And that is helpful only so much as it is helpful. And again, another recovery saying, take what you need, take what helps, and leave the rest here.
There's a story. Rumi was a scholar, like an intellectual scholar, and he had been working on his life's work, these books, and then this dervish, this wild person, Shams Tabriz, shows up and takes Rumi's drafts and throws them in the well. And now you imagine if you're Rumi, you're a little freaked out about this.
I love that.
And Shams Tabriz said to him, if you want, I will get it out and it'll be dry. And at that moment, Rumi said no, because he realized there was another kind of wisdom. There's a wisdom known as presential knowledge that arises through your own experience, And I think what's important to understand about presential knowledge, and I've said this before, it's not like it's sitting in some cosmic library that you have to have the passcode to get to, and now you can Google stuff and get your information. That wisdom is emergent by your relationship with a transcendent aspect of your own being and a transcendent aspect of the entirety of existence, that those two lights interplaying are now enabling a revelation to take place that was never there before, that was never known by anything, including what we think of as God or the divine being. It's emergent. So we've talked throughout this about presence is an emergent property, sacredness is an emergent property. Our purpose for being in this new creation is not to be passive witnesses. Yes, Diane.
Well, I want to give you some frosting for the cake. And that is,
I love frosting.
in your wonderful story of Shams and Rumi, Shams did throw the books in the well, and at the same time, Rumi fell in love with Shams.
Right.
So at each moment when you have this terrible fana, as they call it, or breaking down, everything, nothing's working, just look around and you recognize, in one way of saying it, there I am too.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing this new version of your own being in this other person, in the birds, in the walk, in the rhythm of something rather around you. And so it's like breaking through to a new place, but it's so obvious that that's what's going on at that point.
Joseph Campbell wrote the book, The Hero of Many Names, right? Hero of Many Faces. Is it the name of the book, Hero with Many Faces? But also he wrote The Power of Myth. And I really recommend a good dose of Campbell, not just Joseph Campbell, not only because of its interesting stuff, but the hero's journey is one of the things he's playing at, the central metaphor, the central understanding of what really, and that's a classic episode in what is classically called the hero's journey, the person who confronts you, who is the wise, almost sometimes jester, that undoes your life, but then you recognize, oh wow, I love that guy, or I love that woman who just undoes my life.
Your heart opens.
And your heart opens. That's part of this, and it's worth learning about that. Again, you can learn that all you want. At some point in life, I think we all recognize in various ways, at various stages, oh, I'm on a journey. I thought I was in life. I thought I had it figured out, and I'm not there right now. I'm on a journey between something and on the way to something. And those, back to the question, those are both journeys with maybe we might say a smaller J, but then there's also great big J journeys, like deconstruction events is something that I went through a couple of years ago, where fundamental things were deconstructing, and I was like, oh wow, that's pretty wild. But I didn't look forward to that, but I had done a lot of reading already, thinking that might, thinking I had already figured it out. But the reality is I really hadn't done it. But you can't make this happen, right? You can't organize it.
Yeah, and there's the story of the professor going to the Zen master saying, teach me. And the Zen master says, let's have some tea.
Let's have some.
And so the master starts pouring into the professor's cup and keeps pouring, and it's overflowing. And the professor says, wait, it's overflowing. What are you doing? And he said, you're coming to learn, but you've come with your cup already full.
Right.
And Sufis, Hasranat Khan has this beautiful whole section of teachings on what he calls unlearning. And that doesn't mean developing amnesia to everything, but it means releasing your pre-assumptions about the way that things are, because these pre-assumptions are more than just concepts in your mind. They're the simulation that you've been in for so long that you have no idea that there's a reality that's so much richer than this. And it's being willing to trust, undergoing a process where this is going to have to be deconstructed. It's going to have to be opened up for you to be able to experience the way that you really are and the way that things really are. But the tendency is going to want to be to tie whatever experience you have into a conceptual framework that fits in with the way that you've understood things before. So yes, there are some valuable things to read and study, but also sometimes if we just get too caught up in that, we can have so much going through our head and we're trying to make this and this and this fit together, and it's just, it would be like, I love Mahler. I love Mahler's 10th Symphony. So imagine someone listening to that and just being overwhelmed by the emotions of it, and then someone else who's a music scholar who's had a whole course in Mahler and a whole section on the symphony about this movement and how this ties into this. And while they're listening, they're just referring everything to these ideas about it. And meanwhile, this experience is happening that they're not getting any benefit whatsoever out of. So sometimes it takes a lot of, that's why spiritual practices are so useful, to be able to help our mind make a transition to a different state where it's not dualistic, where we're not conceptualizing what we're experiencing, we're not having expectations about what's going to happen. We're just opening to a place where we're not in control in the way that we're accustomed to. We're in this receptive state, but we don't lose our identity. We don't lose the essential nature of our being that can never be lost, that carries through this experience, because it's only by virtue of the relationship with the essential nature of our being, with what we think of as the divine, even Arby calls it our personal angel, our personal Lord. It's only by virtue of that relationship that something can emerge into the new creation, that something is born, and it takes both of those sides to do. The divine can't just go,
right,
and it's going to come through. We can't, get blueprints and engineers and whatever, say, okay, we're going to build this and make it happen. It has to be this relationship, and it can't be a dualistic relationship. It can't be a preconceived relationship. On the other hand, it avails itself of all the wisdom that we've gained, our capacities to participate.
And that's why practice, I think, I'm more and more attuned to and exploring the radical ideas of communities of practice as being the essential element that we're describing, rather than communities of faith. I think the language hurts us there when we talk about faith communities or communities of faith, because then if we language it as a community of faith, then that implies that I've got to have a certain faith that lines up with other people's faith in order to be a part of that community. And then we're all going to try to find ourselves aligned in faith together. Well, that's another great idea. Fantastic. It's a great idea. It just has nothing to do with the Hebrew scriptures and has nothing to do with the community of Jesus. Tell me one time when Jesus says everybody has to believe the same way. He didn't. And there were people around him who believed in the resurrection going to happen at the end of time. There were people who believed that there wasn't going to be the resurrection, or there were people who believed at the same time that there was going to be a resurrection right now. Jesus was preaching in the midst of a multi-belief system, even within his own faith community. What he did was create, and this is why I follow Jesus, but also other saints as well in the mystical path. I would say the same thing about St. Francis. I would say the same thing about Muhammad. I would say the same thing about ancient communities that are communities of practice, where everybody is having a different experience of their own faith. But in between the enlightenment moments or those emptying moments, the practices are continued. The practices are the midwife for the journey that we're describing. They're the ones that help birth this child that is yearning to be born in our lives over time. The practices are what matter. And those practices are as universal as the day is long. Loving neighbor, loving stranger, making sure food is available, making sure health and resources are available, praying certain prayers that might be rote prayers, that are ancient prayers that I didn't write, that you didn't write, but we pray those prayers together. Doing certain body motions. So if you're a Muslim, you're going to pray at certain times during the day, and you're going to use a rug. But if you're a Christian, you're going to pray the offices in the morning and the evening, and but those practices are not the faith that we're describing. Those are practices that help us help our lives prepare for what might be unfolding. I go birding with people, and when I started as a birder in 2015, I went birding with people who had been birding for 30, 40 years. And they were having a completely different set of experiences than I was. But we were all practicing the same set of practices. It looks like this. Oh, there's a bird. And then it becomes, oh, it's a yellow, it's a red. And now the ones who are well ahead are usually saying, it's a so-and-so, but I'm doing, but the practice is the same practice. We are literally practicing the same thing. We are walking, we are putting on bug spray, we are lifting up binoculars, we are using our eyes, and then we're putting them down, and then we're talking with one another. Some people have a lot of wisdom to share, but we're all having wonderful, powerful, deep and transcendent experiences all together, while some have been doing this for 40, 50 years, and some are as brand new as a day. All in the same community of practice. Isn't that wild?
This might be a good time for meditation.
This is what meditation is about. Is that when we get into meditation spaces, nobody's trying to have anybody else's experience. All we're doing is practicing. And then, like you said last week, you have your experience, I have my experience. It's all, yeah.
Well, let's have an experience
Let's do that.
together. So, close your eyes. And the first part of this, some of you will have done before, but there's going to be a part 2 we have not done before. So, if you believe what the great teachers have said, Hazrat Inayat Khan said that every atom eventually will have its moment of awakening. So if you believe that you eventually in this life or beyond, in some unknown realm, in some unknown vibrational state of being, will have your moment of what is awakening. And awakening isn't static, it doesn't end, but it's a whole different level of being. So if you believe that, use the faculty of your creative imagination to imagine your awakened, illuminated self of the future. What it's like, what the world is like, what your sense of self is like, what your feeling of interconnectedness with all of existence is like. What your delight in every experience you have, with the circulation of light of your being, with the light of whatever you experience. Experience what I've described as everything being Gabriel, seeking to announce itself. And now imagine your awakened self of the future who realizes that he or she is not bound by a sense of identity limited to a particular time and space, but recognizing that your awakened self pervades through all times and all spaces and all realms, including the one on this Sunday morning sitting here at All Saints in the chair at this class on Beyond Returning. So imagine your awakened self holding yourself with your present-day sense of identity in the light of your awakening. And imagine what your awakened self sees encountering you right now. It sees far past your physical appearance, your personality. It sees the true nature of your unique divinity and delights in that. And because this awakened self that seems to be in the future is yourself, you can partake of all that is available to that awakened self right now. You don't have to wait some unknown, indeterminate period of time. That is the natural capacity of your own being that you just didn't know was there. You didn't know it was on the menu. So you can open to experiencing yourself in that same way right now. And the world becomes transformed and transforming. A tree is still a tree, but it's so much more than the tree you thought it was before. And the same with each person you encounter. And as wonderful as this is, you recognize that you are deeply interconnected with every awakened being that has ever been and everyone that will ever be. And all those beings who are on their journeys toward awakening, because like I said, it isn't a static thing. It isn't a destination that you reach. We're all in this journey towards awakening. And you can feel the light of your being being gifted to the light of all other beings and all the other forms of divinity, animate and what seems to be inanimate, manifest and beyond manifestation. And you can hold an intention, let's say for peace. And then you recognize that untold numbers of beings are holding this intention. Even if they physically lived in the past or they have not lived in this timeline yet, your intention can join with theirs, because our interconnection is not limited temporally to the present day. And I've talked before, when you have a system in resonance, let's say 100 things in resonance, and then one more is added, the additional contribution is not just 1/100th more, but it's actually 200 times as much as any single part of that system acting in isolation. So imagine the multitudes, the billions and trillions of beings in all times and realms holding the prayers and intentions for peace, and you add yours. What have you added? You can't even conceive of what you've added. So just try that. Put out the thought of peace from the vastness of who you are, not from your limited sense of self. Not trying to push anything, but you're opening to the intention of allowing this divine quality of peace to suffuse all of existence, to all beings, in all times, and in all realms. And just be there for a bit. And allow yourself to feel the gratitude of this light of peace that you receive from all of these beings holding a common intention. And feel the gratitude of all these beings for the unique contribution of the light of peace that you are making available to everything, everywhere, every time. And may the blessings of God rest upon you. May God's peace abide with you. May God's presence illuminate your heart now and forevermore.